You've probably never stopped to think about this. But what if your mind secretly craves pain? Not just physical pain, but emotional suffering, inner conflicts, even self-sabotage. Sigmund Freud, the father of psychoanalysis, believed that beneath your everyday thoughts lies a shadowy drive, a force that pulls you toward discomfort and chaos. It's as if your brain holds a hidden file marked pain, and it returns to it, again and again. Strange? Absolutely. But it's also terrifyingly true. Freud called this the death drive, a subconscious urge that pushes you to repeat painful patterns, even when you consciously want to stop. Why do we fall for toxic relationships, self-destructive habits, or feelings that break us down? Because deep inside, pain feels oddly familiar, almost comforting. It's a twisted kind of attraction, rooted in the darkest corners of your mind. What if understanding this hidden urge could help you break free? Today, we'll dive into Freud's darkest insight, revealing why your mind is wired to seek pain and how that shapes your life in ways you never imagined. If you want to uncover the hidden forces shaping your choices and finally understand why pain feels so magnetic, hit like and subscribe. Share this with someone who needs to hear the truth behind their darkest habits. The death drive, Freud's darkest discovery. Freud wasn't just interested in what people say or do consciously. He wanted to understand the silent, invisible forces working beneath the surface. One of his most unsettling ideas was the death drive. At first glance, it sounds almost like science fiction. Why would anyone's mind push them toward pain or destruction? But Freud argued this drive is real, lurking deep in your subconscious, constantly nudging you toward chaos. Think about it. How many times have you found yourself drawn to situations that hurt you, even when you know better? It's more than just bad luck or poor choices. Freud suggested that part of you actually seeks out this pain because, paradoxically, it feels familiar. Our minds crave patterns, even painful ones, because they create a sense of control in the chaos of life. The death drive is this strange impulse to return to a state before life itself, calm, but also void and lifeless. This isn't just about self-harm or extreme behaviors. It shows up in everyday life in the form of anxiety, self-sabotage, and recurring emotional wounds. Freud observed that people unconsciously repeat painful experiences, almost like replaying a trauma over and over. Why? Because the pain, strange as it sounds, becomes a twisted form of comfort. Scientific research since Freud's time has found evidence supporting these dark impulses. Studies on trauma survivors, for example, show how the brain can get stuck in cycles of pain, unable to break free without intervention. Psychologists today talk about repetition compulsion, a term Freud coined to describe this unconscious return to pain and suffering. So when you wonder why you keep attracting toxic people or falling into harmful habits, Freud's death drive might be at work behind the scenes. It's like a shadow within you, pulling strings you don't realize you're holding. The mind isn't just about avoiding pain. Sometimes, it's quietly drawn toward it. Understanding this can be unsettling, but it's the first step toward taking back control. By shining a light on these dark drives, you can begin to recognize the patterns, question them, and maybe even stop the cycle. This death drive isn't a simple urge to die or give up. It's more complex and subtle. Freud believed it's an instinct that fights against our natural desire to survive and grow, known as the life drive or eros. These two forces, one pushing toward life, connection, and pleasure, the other toward destruction, pain, and silence, are constantly battling inside you. Imagine this inner conflict like a shadow war happening in your mind. When you feel stuck in pain, or when self-destructive thoughts creep in, that's the death drive making itself felt. It's a whisper convincing you that maybe giving up or causing harm is a way to feel control or escape. Freud first noticed this in his patients, who often repeated painful experiences without realizing it. For example, someone might find themselves drawn back to abusive relationships, not because they want to suffer, but because the pain triggers something deep inside, a familiar emotional pattern rooted in childhood trauma or unresolved conflicts. Even outside clinical cases, this dark impulse appears in everyday behavior. Think about procrastination, self-sabotage, or addiction. These aren't just random bad habits. They can be expressions of the death drive pulling you toward discomfort and chaos, as if your subconscious prefers pain over uncertain change. Modern neuroscience has confirmed parts of Freud's theory. The brain's reward systems sometimes misfire, creating addictions to negative feelings or stress. The emotional pain can stimulate brain chemicals in ways that feel oddly satisfying, reinforcing the cycle. It's important to remember this is not a weakness or a moral failing. Your mind is wired in a complex way, shaped by evolution and experience. The death drive is one side of that wiring, a dark energy inside everyone, even if it stays hidden most of the time. Knowing this dark truth can feel like stepping into a psychological minefield, but it's also a chance to understand yourself on a deeper level. You're not just a victim of circumstance. You have these hidden forces shaping your choices, your fears, your desires. And here's the twist. Recognizing the death drive is the beginning of turning it from a trap into a tool. By seeing how it works, you can start to challenge the patterns it creates, weaken its hold, and take back control over your life. The shadow of repetition. Why you repeat pain. Have you ever noticed how your mind can replay the same painful moments, like a broken record stuck on your worst memories? Freud called this repetition compulsion, and it's one of the darkest tricks your brain plays on you. Instead of moving on, your subconscious drags you back into suffering, over and over. Why would anyone do that? Sounds crazy, but there's a reason. Repetition feels like a way to master the pain. When something painful happens once, it's shocking and confusing. But when it repeats, the mind believes it's learning something, trying to control or understand the experience by living it again. Even if it hurts. This happens in relationships, for example. People often fall into cycles of toxic love, where the same heartbreak, betrayal, or neglect repeats itself. They keep picking partners who remind them of earlier wounds, sometimes even childhood trauma. Why? Because familiar pain, as twisted as it sounds, is safer than the unknown. Freud's patients often relive traumas in therapy, even if they didn't realize it. One case was a woman who kept choosing partners who ignored or hurt her, just like her emotionally distant father. The pain wasn't new, it was déjà vu, familiar and strangely addictive. Psychologists today see this pattern everywhere. It's behind addiction, self-sabotage, and even destructive career choices. Your brain gets stuck in a loop, replaying the same script because it's comfortable. The unexpected is frightening, so the mind prefers pain it knows over uncertainty. A study published in the Journal of Traumatic Stress found that trauma survivors frequently reenact painful scenarios to try to process them. But without healing, this becomes a trap. The mind doesn't heal by reliving pain, it gets trapped deeper inside. What's worse, the more you try to avoid pain consciously, the stronger this unconscious repetition can become. It's like your brain is fighting you, dragging you back toward familiar wounds no matter how hard you push away. This shadow of repetition keeps you stuck in the dark. But understanding it is key. The next chapters will show how pain's grip feels like comfort, and how you can start breaking free from this psychological loop. This cycle of repeating pain isn't limited to relationships or trauma alone. It shows up in the smallest choices you make daily, like avoiding success because deep down you fear failure, or pushing people away just before they get close. These patterns seem to sabotage your happiness, yet they're driven by the same unconscious force Freud described. Think about addiction. Whether it's substance abuse, compulsive behaviors, or even toxic thinking, addiction often masks itself as escape. But under the surface, it's a form of repetition compulsion. The addictive behavior mimics familiar pain or chaos, creating a loop that feels impossible to break. It's your mind replaying a pattern because it knows it, even if it destroys you slowly. This explains why breaking free from these cycles is so difficult. You're not just battling bad habits. You're confronting deep-rooted impulses that have shaped your brain wiring over years, sometimes decades. Freud's insight helps us see that these are not just failures of willpower but battles against a hidden psychological force. But how do you spot this shadow? One way is by paying attention to your emotional reactions. Do certain situations or people trigger the same intense feelings? Do you find yourself drawn back to painful patterns despite your best intentions? These are clues your mind is stuck in repetition. Psychotherapy often focuses on bringing these unconscious patterns into awareness. When you start naming the cycle, it loses some of its power. Real-life examples show that even trauma survivors can begin to rewrite their story once they recognize the repetition compulsion at play. The key is to stop trying to outrun the pain and start understanding its role in your life. Freud's death drive might be pulling the strings, but awareness can be your first step toward freedom. Pain as familiarity, the comfort of discomfort. It might seem strange to say pain feels comfortable, but your brain is wired to seek what's familiar, even if that familiar is suffering. When you feel pain repeatedly, it becomes a strange kind of safety net. This happens because the brain loves patterns and predictability more than pleasure or peace. Imagine walking into a dark room you know well versus an empty bright room you've never seen. The dark room feels scary but also familiar. The unknown bright room feels unpredictable, and your brain resists change. This is why people often cling to pain. They know it, and it feels safer than the unknown possibility of peace or happiness. Studies on trauma survivors show that repeated exposure to pain rewires the brain. Emotional pain becomes a baseline state, something your nervous system expects. When life feels too calm or happy, it can actually trigger anxiety or discomfort because it's unfamiliar territory. So you might unconsciously recreate pain just to feel normal. Freud's insight into this explains a lot about self-destructive behavior. People who grew up in chaotic or painful environments often carry those patterns into adulthood, not because they want to suffer, but because their brain equates pain with home. The concept of emotional homeostasis is key here. Your brain tries to maintain a steady emotional state, even if that state is negative. When you push too hard to change, your brain resists, pulling you back to familiar feelings, no matter how damaging. This also explains why healing feels so hard. You might want to break free from pain, but your brain fights back, craving the old patterns like a drug. The comfort of discomfort is a paradox. Pain feels terrible, but it's also a known quantity, a mental anchor in a sea of uncertainty. But recognizing this can help you shift the balance. Therapies like trauma-informed care work by slowly introducing new emotional experiences, rewiring the brain's expectations. Over time, the comfort zone can expand beyond pain, making peace feel familiar too. The dark attraction to pain isn't a personal failure or weakness. It's a deeply rooted survival mechanism your brain developed to protect you. But once you understand how this works, you can start to question why you hold on to pain and whether it really serves you anymore. The brain's wiring for familiarity goes even deeper than just emotional comfort. Neuroscientists have discovered that the neural pathways connected to trauma and pain become strengthened through repetition, like a well-worn path in the forest. Each time you revisit painful thoughts or situations, those paths grow stronger, making it easier to return again and again. This is why changing painful habits or breaking free from toxic cycles feels like climbing a steep hill. Your brain resists because it prefers the easier, worn-down path, even if that path leads to suffering. Pain, in this sense, acts like a twisted kind of security blanket. It's predictable, feels like home. This neurological reality explains why letting go of pain is never as simple as telling yourself to move on. When your brain expects pain, peace feels foreign, and that can create internal conflict. The anxiety and discomfort of the unknown can sometimes push you back into familiar suffering, just to regain that feeling of emotional balance. Consider the case of people who stay in abusive relationships. It's not because they want to suffer. It's because the pain, the chaos, and even the fear have become their emotional baseline. The moments of calm feel so strange and unsettling that the mind unconsciously seeks to recreate the known, painful pattern. Freud's insight into this dark comfort of pain opens a new way of understanding human behavior. Instead of judging yourself for staying in pain, you can begin to see it as a survival strategy that once served a purpose but now holds you captive. The next step is to gently challenge this pattern by introducing new experiences, ones that feel safe, steady, and peaceful. It's a slow process, but with awareness and support, the brain's wiring can change. Over time, what once felt painful can be replaced by a new, healthier sense of comfort. Breaking the cycle. Can you escape the death drive? Knowing about the death drive and the comfort found in pain might make you feel trapped, like you're a puppet to your darkest urges. But here's the crucial question. Can you break free? Is it possible to escape the pull of pain and destruction Freud described? The answer isn't simple, but yes, you can. Understanding this dark force is the first step to weakening it. The key lies in awareness and intentional change. When you recognize these unconscious patterns, you take away their power. Therapies like psychoanalysis, cognitive behavioral therapy, and trauma-informed care work by helping people uncover the hidden drives behind their pain. By bringing these forces into the light, patients can begin to see their patterns clearly, understand their origins, and develop new ways to respond. One powerful tool is mindfulness, the practice of observing your thoughts and feelings without judgment. Mindfulness creates space between impulse and action, giving you the chance to choose differently. Instead of reacting automatically to pain or destructive urges, you can pause, reflect, and decide to break the cycle. Real-life stories show this is possible. Take Sarah, who, after years in abusive relationships, started therapy and learned to recognize her repetition compulsion. She discovered her need to recreate pain was tied to childhood neglect. With guidance, she slowly built new patterns of self-respect and healthier relationships. The process was hard and slow, but by facing her death drive, she weakened its grip. Another method is building emotional resilience. This means strengthening your ability to handle pain without falling back into destructive patterns. Resilience grows through small steps, setting boundaries, practicing self-care, and developing supportive relationships. Neuroscience backs this up. The brain remains plastic, meaning it can change throughout life. New neural pathways can form when you learn new behaviors or ways of thinking. This means the familiar paths of pain aren't permanent prisons but can be rewired toward healing and growth. But it's important to be patient. The death drive is powerful because it's deeply rooted in survival instincts. Changing its influence takes time, effort, and often professional support. It's not about erasing pain entirely but learning to live with it without letting it control you. So, can you escape the death drive? Yes, but only by facing it head-on, understanding it, and building new, healthier habits to replace the old, painful ones. The hidden power of pain, transformation, or trap. Pain is a double-edged sword. On one side, it can trap you in endless cycles of suffering, controlled by the death drive Freud described. On the other, pain holds a hidden power, a chance for transformation. But how can the same force cause destruction and growth? It depends on how you engage with pain. If you run from it or allow it to control you unconsciously, pain becomes a trap. It pulls you deeper into repetition and self-destruction. But if you face pain with awareness and courage, it can become a doorway to self-understanding and healing. Many psychological theories support this. Carl Jung talked about shadow work, where confronting your darkest parts leads to wholeness. Pain forces you to look at what you usually hide, the fears, wounds, and parts of yourself you avoid. When you bring those into the light, they lose power. Freud's death drive isn't simply about destruction. It's also about returning to a state of balance. Pain signals that something inside needs attention. It can be a warning or an opportunity, a push to change, grow, and finally heal. Consider Viktor Frankl, a psychiatrist who survived Nazi concentration camps. He found that even in extreme pain, people can find meaning. Pain became a powerful teacher, leading to resilience and a deeper understanding of life. This shows that suffering doesn't have to break you, it can build you. But this transformation requires choice. You have to decide whether to let pain define you or use it as fuel for change. It's not easy, and sometimes it takes professional help or strong support systems. But it's possible. So, Freud's dark insight into your attraction to pain isn't a sentence to misery. It's a challenge. It asks you to understand your mind's shadows and decide what role pain will play in your life. Will you stay trapped in its pull, or will you turn pain into a path forward? The choice is yours.